So the part of it that I think is freeing is recognizing that you are a separate individual apart from that system, and that you get to make your own choices about how you behave, what you think, how you act. And that, as this somatic experience, then you get to have your own bodily experience and sensations that are separate from that status quo, that machine, those oppressive systems, however you want to think of it, whatever you want to name it. And that's the part that's freeing, is that you get to be that individual body on your own.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, we're talking about academic advising. I'm joined by three leaders who are here to discuss the basics of academic advising, as well as explore equity in academic advising. We have some really innovative thinkers and leaders. I'm so excited to learn from each of you. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. We're launching our first ever listener survey. Please take a moment to share with us what you like and what you're looking for in the podcast. At the end of this month, February 2022, we'll draw 3 names and send you a Student Affairs Now mug, just like this one. You can scan the QR code or click on the image on our social media or on our website, or go to tiny.cc/SANowSurvey. This episode is brought to you by Stylus. Visit styluspub.com and use promo code SANOW for 30% off and free shipping. This episode is also sponsored by Vector Solutions, formerly Everfi, the trusted partner for 2,000 and more colleges and universities. Vector Solutions is the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm broadcasting from Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the intersections of the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. Let's get to our conversation. I'm so grateful for the three of you for joining us today. Let's begin with some introductions. And CJ, we're going to start with you.
Hello, so I'm CJ Venable. My pronouns are they, them, their, and I am the Training and Professional Development Specialist for University Academic Advising at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm joining you from Lincoln, Nebraska, on lands stolen from the Sioux, Jewere, and Oto-Missouri peoples. My whole professional career has been in academic advising, and also my scholarly work has focused on aims of academic advising, the role of critical whiteness studies in higher education, as well as queer and trans people in higher education. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you, CJ. Thanks for being here. And Ariel, tell us a little bit about you.
My name's Ariel Collatz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the undergraduate programs supervisor for the Arts Group Advising Center at the University of California, Davis campus. That campus sits on the Patwin homelands, and I'm currently in Sacramento, California, which is on the Nisenan homelands. And I am originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where you're located. The work that I do is focused on both leadership and academic advising. And I also have the opportunity to work one-on-one with students. So I'm responsible for training, development, visioning, guiding students, doing everything from, that first look at the university when they're thinking about coming there, to congratulating them as they're walking out the door in graduation. Right now, my research is focusing on the emotional components of doing social justice work and what we're doing on the inside as we're navigating the changes that we want to see in the world on the outside.
Awesome. Well, that could be a whole episode on its own. Maybe we'll have to do that down the road. Thank you for being here. And Drew, you're kind of responsible for organizing this. You suggested both CJ and Ariel. So thank you for these great recommendations. I'm so excited for the conversation. Tell us a little bit more about you.
My name is Drew Puroway. I use he, him pronouns, and I work at the University of St. Thomas. I'm across the river from Keith in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the ancestral homelands of the Minnesota Makoche. And I made the leap from res life to primary role advising in 2009. And it was good timing because my capacity to do things late at night that required, a lot of presence and thought was diminishing as I approached my 30s, and my family was growing. So I traded a duty phone for a crying infant, and was fortunate to find a role as a primary role advisor at St. Thomas, and had that for 8 years. And it was great to be kind of closer to the academic life of students and the university. And for the last 5 years, I've had an amazing job leading a team of 10 other primary role academic advisors. And on the scholarly side, I study professional socialization, theory and philosophy of and in advising, and ethics, how advisors approach ethics.
Mm-hmm. And you're teaching a class right now, is that right? Do you want to mention that real quick?
Oh, it's just wrapping up. I taught a class this J-term called Paulo Freire, His Life and Pedagogy, and it was a wonderful experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you can hear from these introductions a little bit about where we're going to go here, but let's begin with a little bit of basics on academic advising. When we're talking about academic advising as a functional role in higher education and student affairs, what all does that include? And Drew, I think you're going to kick us off here.
Okay, so I think this is surprisingly more contested and complicated, at least to me, than you might have guessed. But I'll talk for a minute, like conceptually, and then sort of get more towards the task-oriented practice-based things. So Terry Kuhn from 2008 in our big old handbook of academic advising used this definition sort of in an effort to broadly capture what academic advising is. And it's situations in which an institutional representative gives insights or direction to a college student about an academic, social, or personal matter. The nature of this direction might be to inform, suggest, counsel, discipline, coach, mentor, or even teach.
So everything.
Everything, yes. So Kuhn goes on to sort of write about how advising vis-a-vis this very broad definition goes all the way back to Harvard in the 1630s, and it's obviously vague. So you can then start to think about like positionality. I'm an advisor, right? Like, but this can look all sorts of different ways at different types of institutions, and depending on the mission, the type of institution, the structure of the institution, the curriculum. So there's this oft quoted line from Wes Hadley that's academic advising is the only structured service on campus in which all students have the opportunity to develop an ongoing one-to-one relationship with a concerned member of the college community. And this may or may not be true, depending on all sorts of factors, right? So another like often quoted description of what effective advising is from a colleague, Mark Lowenstein, who wrote that the excellent advisor plays a role with respect to a student's entire curriculum that is analogous to the role that the excellent teacher plays with respect to the content of a single course. So Mark's writing about the logic of the curriculum and approaching advising as teaching. So the philosophy and theory that informs an approach, of which there are many approaches, and this leads into particular practices. So onto the like practical part here. So the practices are then employed within encounters with students, and often centering around discussions of discerning a major. Sometimes it's related to a career or vocation on the other side of that, and other times it's helping the students break apart that connection that X major leads to X career and living happily ever after, or the opposite, right? And it can also be something about academic policy and its interpretation in a particular situation. I ran into somebody in the just outside our office suite and explained the retake policy. It can be rendering assistance in a course, in course selection and registration. And it can be discussions of academic difficulty. It can be creating long, course plans. It can be answering really trivial questions like, does this psychology course count for my general education requirements? It can be talking through issues and helping support students because of the universe that happens around their academics, which academics should be challenging under the best of circumstances. So you layer in any of those life things and it gets very complicated. So at the center of all that's a relationship. And these are sometimes short one-off encounters, and sometimes they're relationships that last more than 4 years in the case, with undergrads. And it's a series of what I think of as moments of beauty and chaos, a beautiful and chaotic moment where a student sits across from you and you say something like, "What brings you in today?" Or "What do you want to talk about today?" And the next thing that comes out might be super trivial, like, "Can you help me switch into an earlier English section?" Mm-hmm. Or it might be something like, "My professor just said some super racist stuff and I don't know what to do." Or mm-hmm. "I haven't been to class in 2 weeks and I feel totally lost." So the relationship then is mediated in and around all sorts of things within your institution and within ourselves as mm-hmm. bringing what we do to those relationships. So, and then many advisors also support faculty in their roles, mm-hmm. both as faculty advisors and in dealing with struggling students. They'll consult with professional advisors sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'm really taken by this notion of the idea that academic advisors are kind of responsible for the overall curriculum, just like a professor's advisor is responsible for an individualized course. I've never thought about it that way. That really makes sense. And I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that I'd never thought about that way. And I love how you've broken down some of the components, from choosing a major or program to getting registered for classes to navigating policies to really building a relationship and supporting students and faculty. CJ, what would you add or build on to what Drew has sort of put the foundation here for us?
Yeah, I think that Drew's answer was certainly very comprehensive. I think that one thing that has certainly come to the fore recently is sort of what Drew ended on, this question of supporting struggling students, particularly as we have entered this sort of student success era. The advisors have really been the primary institutional agents charged with connecting with students who may be in difficulty or are in difficulty. So as we see the rise of tools like predictive analytics to try and identify students earlier who may be having challenges academically and persisting, it often falls to advisors to be the ones who proactively outreach to students, who engage in a more case management type of relationship with students rather than just once or twice a semester kind of meeting relationship with students. So there's certainly been an intensification around what advisors are expected to do beyond some of those pieces of, course scheduling that are often what students immediately associate with their academic advisor.
Yeah. Well, and then the dark side was sort of being called on to help with all of the student success, is that then isn't there sometimes blame? Why is the student failing out? What happened? What did their academic advisor do wrong? Does that happen too?
Yes, indeed.
All three of you nodding your head in agreement. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff around that hasn't fully been examined by the field, because we've sort of moved into this place where, of course, it's an expectation that advisors are contributing to this retention-oriented mission, but that wasn't a conscious decision made on the part of advisors. That is generally an institutional mandate saying, we don't have the money to hire new staff, so this is an additional role that you get to take on now. And if you really love students, you'll be calling them at all hours and trying to reach out to them multiple times and adding this on top of your existing caseload. So there's a lot to be said about that is just beginning to enter the conversation.
Well, and an academic advisor can't correct in a 20 to 30 minute meeting all sorts of institutional culture and societal issues and student mental health and academic challenges and pipeline issues. Although I'm sure you all try your best, but we need some community responsibility. Ariel, what would you like to add to how we're beginning to define academic advising here?
Yeah, so the thing that, really struck me about what Drew said is it's this sort of way that academic advisors weave through the entire institution. It's like there's no part of the institution that an academic advisor doesn't touch and needs to be able to connect the student to any resource, anything that they need. Obviously with the focus of their, curriculum and the academics. But that ability to get the student to move throughout the entire institution. And that, as CJ mentioned, the extra expectation that academic advisors have the capacity within their 8-hour day to then help support those, students who are struggling. And folks may or may not have the training to do that. They may or may not be getting professional development support from their institutions to do that. And there may not be like clear guidelines within the institution of, the number of students that somebody's able to, have in their caseload and what the expectation is for a particular caseload. I know in some institutions, there are guidelines about the number of students in a given advisor's caseload. I know in some institutions, there are wildly different caseload numbers between academic advisors. So it's sort of like if you're in this group or this major or this program, you have a lot more support than if you're in this other group. And it's not necessarily based on the amount of need a particular student has. It's just sort of randomly the way that funds have been allocated in an institution. So I don't know that institutions are necessarily savvy about getting funds to the places where students need them. We've got better data tools, but I don't know that we're using them the best that we can at our institutions right now.
Well, and I would think that a lot of these funds are sort of retroactively after the fact, ad hoc, added on, not added on as things go, rather than saying, let's really look at all of this together. I really appreciate that foundation. I'm kind of really feeling the really great and awesome breadth of the role of an academic advisor. The flip side of that is kind of the overwhelming pressure to know all the things, fix all the things, solve all the things, tend to all the things, repair all of the things that comes along with this. I want to move us on to a couple different models. Ariel and I were talking before we hit record about sharing an undergraduate institution. And at least when I was there, we overlapped a little bit, we're finding out. Hamline University had a model where faculty who taught a first-year seminar were your academic advisor until you declared a major. Then you move to another faculty member in your major who is then your academic advisor. And I love that model. It made so much sense to me. I had great connections with those faculty. They were really allowed someone to be connected to me in lots of other ways. But then I moved beyond that and started seeing models of professional advisors where that was their primary function, doing this with a lot more professional development, time, and I really saw the benefits of that model. And some campuses have a bit of both, right? Some over here and some over there. So help us understand some of the considerations for these different models. What's kind of the rationale, the upsides and downsides? And Ariel, let's lead off with you.
Yeah. So, there's lots of institutions that have a mix of different models, right? So one is a heavy weight on the professional academic advisor model. So that's someone whose primary job is to advise students. And at a lot of institutions, those folks also have other duties along with that. They have administrative responsibilities that support academic department things that need to be done. So that may include scheduling classes. That's often a thing that academic advisors will do, or other things that have to do with students' registration and enrollment as well. So that's the primary advisor model. A lot of institutions have primary advisors, and then they'll also have some level of faculty advising. So for those folks, they would generally go to the primary advisor to get their registration hold taken care of, but then they would get mentoring or some sort of specialized academic advising from their faculty advisor. And then there's other institutions where they have just a faculty advisor who's the person who takes care of all of their advising responsibilities. For the larger public R1 institutions, that's where you're going to see more of those specialized professional academic advisors, and those smaller private liberal arts colleges are where you're going to have more of those just faculty advisors. I think that the interesting question about this is, culture, obviously, of the institution. What is the field that the campus is looking for to have students experience as part of their advising, is one of those considerations. Another thing that I think is really interesting to think about is the structure that the campus has, like what the campus says we explicitly want to do, and then the kinds of activities that the campus incentivizes, particularly around faculty advising. So faculty in campuses where they have a really high priority for doing research, and faculty are also expected to have advising responsibilities. How are faculty encouraged and compensated for those advising responsibilities? Let's say faculty get a course release to do their advising, but then a high priority is put on research and they're compensated and encouraged to do that research. Are faculty tempted to take that course release and spend that time doing their research or doing advising, if there's no way that there's accountability for that advising? Or, if it's sort of like teaching and then service is down here, but research is really held up in high esteem. And same thing with professional advisors. Like, what is the campus incentivizing? How are they prioritizing the work that folks need to do? And then, like, what are the results that they're getting from the incentives that they're actually putting into place, not just the structure that they say they want to use.
Yeah, awesome. CJ, what would you add about these different models?
Well, so this also dovetails nicely with Ariel's earlier comment about sort of the haphazard way that students are going to experience advising based on distribution of resources. There are many large institutions that are highly, sort of decentralized, that may use multiple of those models on the same campus. So a student in one college might experience exclusively faculty advising, and a student in a different major might exclusively experience professionalized advising with an assigned advisor. So there's those pieces about the student experience, but then we've also seen the ways that sort of new and creative ways of adding things to advisors' plates can take the form of roles that are split between advising and recruitment responsibilities. We see many campuses have moved to expect advisors to be able to also do career development work. We've seen, in some cases, advisors who have departmental responsibilities, like being the internship coordinator for a department. And so campuses, I think, are trying to explore ways in a climate where resources only seem to decline, to be able to sort of pick up the slack as they're not able to continue having individual people for doing all of these roles. And it's not 100% clear that there are considerations about what that does to the quality of advising that students receive. Because if advisors are also attending evening and weekend recruiting events, what is it like for them when they're actually on campus trying to see students? If they're responsible for some of these other outside departmental responsibilities, what does that do? So there are all of these pieces that are really shaping what advising is like for students, that make it very different, not only campus to campus, but even within the same campus.
Yeah, I'm really hearing the one of the themes that we hear across all of our episodes in the podcast is just being asked to do more with less, more with less, more with less. And I think that was a really generous, not 100% clear, CJ. So thank you for that. Drew, what would you add here about these different models?
Well, yeah, so there's this idea that we get creative and in in advising. So on my team, I've got an advisor who's primary role advisor, but is one of our school certifying officials with the VAs and focuses on that. So there's these different focuses too that foci that come into to the student populations that advisors work with. So a couple of my team members are nearly exclusively focused on international students. Another advisor who is focused on a particular population of students who have transitioned from a 2-year program we have within our institution, and supporting students there. So that's completely different than when I started, and everybody was a generalist academic counselor in our department, and then even other things besides like the work with students. There's the proliferation of technology around advising has caused us to bring somebody into our team that's willing to sort of be the champion of those things, and that's that's something that's certainly been we're talking about current events in advising. I think that's there's just a lot of increased rate of change in that.
Yeah. I'm curious, just kind of quickly, you're talking about some of these changes going from generalist advisors to more specialized focus on programs or student populations or things like that. Is that a trend that we see kind of moving in that direction? Or is it more like I see in housing and residence life, where I see equal amounts taking housing and residence life and separating them, as I see merging housing and residence life? Doesn't seem to be a trend either way, but just seems constant. Is there a trend toward fewer generalist advisors and more specialized, or not? Is it just kind of moving each way? And is there a trend toward more faculty advisors versus more professionalized advisors, or not? Quick thoughts?
I think in general, there's certainly a move away from faculty advisors. I think that in general, the capacity to ask staff members to take on new duties, to serve increasingly large caseloads is something that you can't do as readily with faculty members. And so I think that we've seen a shift also as part of this sort of student success movement of, if we have somebody who's dedicated to doing this work with students, we also have greater control over the quality of advising that students receive. So I think that's certainly a trend. Not as sure about changing models.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Well, as we heard in your introductions, all three of you are really focused in really different ways around equity in academic advising. And our audience is super interested in these conversations about different models, philosophies, mindsets, approaches that can bring equity more centered in our work. And they're also interested in really practical, pragmatic tools and approaches and strategies. So I'd love to hear from all three of you about what you see emerging, either in your scholarship or in your practice, what you see as trends, and some recommendations you might make so that we can better center equity in academic advising work and in the institution's work, and better serve all of our students. CJ, we're going to let you kick us off on this one.
Sure. So two things that I see from my work and as trends within advising. Certainly there is a move towards a stronger emphasis on the idea of advisors being advocates for students, saying that advisors should be expected to look for patterns when they're meeting with students that indicate that there are systemic barriers at the institution, and advocating for those things to change. Receptivity to advisors doing that is certainly highly varied, but I think that in terms of a skill set, a lot of folks are seeing that is something that advisors really need to be able to effectively serve students. In terms of my own work, I've really made a turn towards trying to think with decolonial and settler colonial thinkers around the role of higher education and kind of questioning a lot of the closely held beliefs about what the purpose and aims of advising should be if we understand the institution as fundamentally a force for settler colonial expansion. And so I think that as we continue on, there's going to be an increasing look at how some of these more critical theories can come to bear on really the purpose of advising, whereas in the past, many of those purposes were sort of unquestioned, that of course we are agents of the institution, of course we are struggling to balance allegiances to both students and to our employer, but really questioning how much loyalty we should have when we see the level to which institutions can be oppressive, not only towards students, but faculty and staff, communities, and the ways that those pieces are really raising a lot of ethical questions about our capacity to sustain the institution when sustaining the institution ultimately means sustaining oppression in that way.
How might that purpose shift? You talked about some of the ways that maybe we want to shift away from. If we do make that shift in purpose, what might we be shifting toward?
So I have been thinking a lot about a teeny tiny book called A Third University is Possible by La Paperson. And in that book, the author advocates for those who work within the settler colonial university to rethink their role and look for opportunities to press back against oppressive structures in ways that your employer may not approve of. And so really starting to think about, what are the things that we can do when no one is watching? What are the things that we can not ask permission to do and make use of the privilege that we have as people who work for the institution? For myself and my work in critical whiteness studies, I think a lot about what level of risk I can take as a white person who talks a lot about race, that other folks may be at an increased risk compared to me. So really thinking about, I don't particularly want to get fired, but I also know that there are things that I can be doing, decisions that are in my purview that I can make around, in my role, making decisions about the kinds of professional development opportunities that I provide and making a conscious choice to center equity and social justice as part of all of those opportunities on our campus is something that may or may not align 100% with the desires of the institution, but is a way that I can try and equip other people to do that kind of advocacy for students. And so you certainly get into some challenging territory at times, but it's really about forcing us to come to grips with what it means to continue to sustain the status quo in ways that we don't like to think about, because it would require us to acknowledge just how oppressive our institutions can be towards students, faculty, staff, communities, and on and on.
Yeah, I love this. The Third University, a great reference. We'll make sure we get that in the show notes. And also shifting away from oppressive systems, and how do we create more liberatory structures and more liberatory experiences for students, right? Both organizationally, structurally, but also in that individual level as well, the both and there. Ariel, what are some of the equity-centered approaches and practices that you're doing, that you're seeing, that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I'm glad that I get to go after CJ to talk about this. That status quo, and some of the ways that we maintain that are through policing ourselves. And something that happens, when something comes up, there's like an oppressive structure, and we ourselves will contribute to the maintenance of that. And sometimes it's as simple as to contribute to the maintenance of that keeps ourselves comfortable. And to break with the maintenance of that is to be uncomfortable. And so what can we do to break with the status quo and manage the discomfort that we experience as we decouple ourselves from that system? So, but that's an emotional experience that we have, right? We might feel angry, or we might feel sad. We might feel frustrated. Yeah. Like any of those emotions could come up as we experience that process. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is that emotional uncoupling of the status quo. I mean, it's literally something that we feel in our bodies. So it's like we've taken the status quo and we've embodied it. It's physically become part of us. So how can we take that status quo, take it outside of our bodies so that we can stop maintaining those structures? So that's what I've really become interested in, because I think that until we can start doing that work, it's really hard to do that equity work, because we're like fighting with ourselves internally about, do I make myself uncomfortable in this situation? Do I maintain my comfort in this situation? But once we can figure out what we need to do in our emotional space to move forward and deal with that discomfort, then I think that that equity work just becomes that much easier for us.
Yeah. So you're really positioning the emotions and the somatic experiences of the systems and structures in our bodies as a big obstacle. As long as I'm caught up in my emotions and the tension in my shoulders, then I'm focused there rather than on the change I want to make, or this student needs something very different from me than I planned on in our 20 minutes.
Yeah,
and it's a really critical thing to acknowledge and recognize and work through, so that the focus can be on the change or the service or the student, right?
Yeah, and that's difficult work to ask folks to do, but it's like freeing work to be able to do that, to be in it, or in some cases to get to the other side of it, where you can say, I'm going to say the thing in the meeting that's going to disrupt the status quo, and I don't care, or I can handle the sensations in my body that are uncomfortable that are going to come.
Or I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the juice and the energy and the thing. Could you just say just a little bit more about, you talked about how it is hard work, and some people don't think it's should be a part of their work life to explore emotions. But you said it's freeing. Could you say just a little bit more, or maybe an example about that part?
Yeah. So the part of it that I think is freeing is recognizing that you are a separate individual apart from that system, and that you get to make your own choices about how you behave, what you think, how you act. And that, as this somatic experience, then you get to have your own bodily experience and sensations that are separate from that status quo, that machine, those oppressive systems, however you want to think of it, whatever you want to name it. And that's the part that's freeing, is that you get to be that individual body on your own.
Yeah. Beautiful. Drew, I'm sorry you have to go after both of those.
I know. I was like not sure if it was appropriate to use the reaction buttons in the fancy podcast, but like I wanted to do all the hearts here.
What would you add, Drew?
Well, I mean, it's so easy with what advising is to get like it goes to power and control real fast. Like some dean or higher has thrown a bunch of money at advising to be the panacea of retention. And so it's like,
well, let me just interject. I was thinking about that as CJ was talking about the shift from faculty to staff, sort of, and C didn't say this, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like faculty might be more resistant, where staff are easier to control because they don't have tenure, they don't have some of these protections, they don't have a faculty senate, and we can just make them do it. And if they don't like it, we have control, right?
Yeah. So I think in thinking about like what's really maybe radical or is acts of disobedience. I talked to an advisor who was really frustrated that some dean was like approving something from some privileged squeaky wheel student. And so this advisor went out and was like, I'm going to dig in the data and I'm going to find every single other student in this situation that could get this same exception to the policy that didn't have the like privilege to like whine or, you know, whatever, engage, like, and I thought, you know, wow, that is like just a great example of, I guess it's, you know, throwing a wrench into the system. It doesn't necessarily change the system, but it frames your practice, you know, looking for those things. Kind of taking things in another direction, like, you know, if your institution's mission is something to do with like the common good, and you're sort of shaping students' perception of their own education, you can again take that 40,000 foot view of the curriculum, and you have some ability within those interactions to point students towards critical consciousness. So when you talk about the curriculum, you have to deal with the unjust implications of that. So if you're, and are students thinking about their education is making them sort of like more or less free? And is it giving you a more critical comprehension of what freedom even means? And that's something we so desperately, I think, need in our society right now. It's not, yeah, you're not going to start some internal revolution in a 30-minute advising conversation, but it's that hope for the future. I'm in my approach to advising, like, I have lots of hope and little expectation of that, but we also can serve, like, and this is a within the system sort of approach. It's not the revolution, but it's like we are interpreters of the institution for those who do not have the experiences coming in, and again, without an eye towards that this whole relationship is a lot of power and control, and that's very much, I think, how it gets framed in the minds of like administrators, and unfortunately not framed in the minds of, like, the awareness isn't always there, that being that interpreter, you have to really be rooted with your students. And I think in a lot of those conversations, it's really hard for a room full of people with fancy degrees to get past like a deficit way of thinking about students.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to the really great example you gave. I mean, the definition of privilege is advantages that some people get that other people don't, and advantages that some people get that everyone should get, but they don't. And so sort of, you know, I can't override the dean in giving this exemption, but what if everybody who needed it got it too, right? That could be really disrupting things. And I'm so glad you chimed in there about a deficit model approach, moving away from that to what does everyone have to offer? What are they bringing? What are they already knowing? What's the lived experience? What's the richness of that? We got a little bit before I want to move to our closing question. So CJ, Ariel, anything the two of you want to add here before we move to wrapping up?
I'll add a couple of specific things about centering equity in academic advising. You know, I think it's really important to have conversations with students about identity, about who they are. And this does not just mean, you know, having a conversation with students of color, or trans students, or, you know, students that don't hold privilege, but having a conversation about identity with students who do hold privilege. And then, you know, identifying ways to create equitable environments for students. So, you know, like, what do folks need? So like, are the bathrooms in your building available and accessible to all students? Is the seating in your building available and accessible to all students? Just really simple things like that. Who is my student population, and what is it that they need, and how can I advocate for that in really simple ways so that they can physically come to my office and sit with me? Because if they can't do like the number one thing of getting to you, then you're not, as an advisor, going to be able to get to the next step of having that deep and helpful conversation with them.
And how do they see themselves in the space, in the art, in the examples, in the people, and feel seen in their experience there? Yeah, awesome. CJ, you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I had two thoughts. First of all, I just have to say, the first time that I heard Drew pose the question of how is your education making you less free as a way to engage in advising with students, was truly a transformative moment for me, and is something that I continue to be haunted by in thinking about that power relationship between advisors and students. That's part of the reason my concerns about some of the technological advances around things like early alerts and predictive analytics have really come to the fore, because those are all fundamentally premised off of a deficit way of thinking about students. You can't develop some sort of scoring model without ranking students. You can't develop a sort of a color-coded rating system or a numerical rating system without considering some of those inputs that are entirely out of students' control, like what high school that they went to, what their race is. And starting from that place of saying, all of the students of color are going to get a lower rating on this predictive analytics tool because we know that there are these associations between who actually graduates from this institution and those demographic categories. Making those decisions based on those kinds of tools is an expression of power. And so really starting to critically analyze how we use those tools, why we use those tools, engaging in really thoughtful discussions about what are the implications of that way of sort of sorting and managing students, as coming from this position of, based on this score, that means we know something about you. And so I'm going to act in a particular way because I know what's best for you based on this tool that's supposedly telling me something. It is really something that has become very commonplace and has not really been critically examined yet. And so I think that there are lots more conversations coming. I can say I'm in a couple of different writing projects that are starting to explore that now, but really to say that some of those power dynamics are still really underexplored in advising, because for many advisors, the idea that students come to me because I have expert knowledge and the students should follow the advice that I give them. So this fundamentally unequal power dynamic is just the way things are for so many advisors. And so really starting to grapple with what it would look like to have a less hierarchical kind of relationship with students, I think is something that it's a conversation I'm really excited for. I think that Drew's scholarship around a critical pedagogy kind of approach to advising is a great start. And I think there's much more work to be done in thinking about what that could look like.
Yeah. Well, wow, we've covered ground from the emotional experiences in our bodies of oppressive systems to troubling predictive analytics and everything in between. So thank you all so much. We are running out of time. This podcast is called Student Affairs Now. We always like to end with asking folks, what are you thinking, troubling, or pondering now? It might be something you're thinking about in your scholarship or in your practice, or maybe just something that's coming up for you as we move through this conversation. So we'll give each of you a chance to share what's with you now. And if you also want to share where folks can connect with you, that would be great and welcome as well. So Drew, what are you troubling now?
Well, CJ's comment is actually something that I do think about, and I had mentioned before, like the proliferation of technology and surveillance technology in some ways, that a CRM helped my team better manage the follow-up we do on academic alerts, and it removed the emotional connection to the students. It became a game of digital whack-a-mole. We're just so that's an interesting little piece of what someone I talked to once called like cyborg sociology or something like that. But I also I am just troubled by, we have this system, but then there was a group of students that they're like, well, they're getting D's and F's. Why were there no alerts? And it's like, because the students are great and they're like doing the things. It's just that like the support services in this particular situation are not culturally responsive. It's a big investment in something that I think in some ways just can fundamentally change the work. And it's real easy, I think, for advisors to fall in the trap of if your biggest, fanciest tool is a degree evaluation, you recenter so many things around that $100,000 worth of app that your institution may have gotten. And that's so
sounds like we're getting closer to just pushing widgets out the door and away from the humanity of it. Ariel, what's with you now?
So what's troubling me now is this push to always be doing more with less. And I'm wondering where the room for our humanity is when we're always doing more with less, because that seems to be the one thing, as some of this conversation has brought up, keeps getting pushed away.
Great. How about you, CJ?
Well, you've heard a bit of some of the things I'm thinking about. One other direction my thinking is going is I recently started reading Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. And so I'm really starting to think about, if we know that certainly across higher education and student affairs, it's the same in advising, that there's a significant departure from the field within the first 5 years, trying to start thinking about, how does pleasure factor into people's thinking about their work, and what are the ways that we've been disciplined into finding particular things pleasurable. So this, of course, you have to be intrinsically motivated by your love for students, and that is the primary satisfaction you receive from your work, is the messaging that a lot of people receive. And then when you get into a role and find that that may not sustain you at every moment, I think that there's certainly more work to be done. I'm trying to do some more thinking around, what does it look like to center pleasure in our work in advising and across higher ed student affairs.
I love that. A great author I'm familiar with. Haven't read that one, but I think you're making me think about new things and some new possibilities there. So, well, thanks to all three of you for joining us. This has been terrific in all that you brought and all that you shared. Thanks for your leadership and your contributions today. We also want to thank our sponsors for today's episode, Stylus and Vector Solutions. Stylus is proud to be a sponsor of the podcast. You can browse their student affairs, diversity, and professional development titles at styluspub.com. You can always use the promo code SANOW for 30% off all books plus free shipping. You can find the Stylus on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at StylusPub. And Vector Solutions. How will your institution rise to reach today's socially conscious generation? These students report commitments to safety, well-being, and inclusion are as important as academic rigor when selecting a college. It's time to reimagine the work of student affairs as an investment, not an expense. For over 20 years, Vector Solutions, which now includes the Campus Prevention Network, formerly Everfi, has been the partner of choice for 2,000 and more colleges and universities and national organizations. With 9 efficacy studies behind their courses, you can trust and have full confidence they're using the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Transform the future of your institution and the community you serve. Learn more at vectorsolutions.com/studentaffairsnow. And as always, a huge shout out to Natalie Ambrosi, the production assistant behind the podcast, who makes us all look and sound good. And don't forget to complete our listener survey in the month of February to win your chance at a mug just like this. You can find that on our social media, on our webpage, in our newsletter, and at tiny.cc/SANow survey. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks again to the fabulous guests today and to everyone who's watching and listening. Make it a great week. Thanks all.